Welcome to Kent Hance, the best storyteller in Texas podcast. Be sure to check back through our past episodes. There's some great stuff there. And we start every episode with the saying of the day. Chancellor, what do you have for us?
Necessity is the mother of invention. Big part, you go back to every great invention, there's been a demand for a solution, and somebody came forward with a solution. Mm-hmm. Thomas Edison had over 200 ways that didn't work. And he when he was asked about it, there's failures out there. He said, we just found out what wouldn't work, and he kept trying, and he finally got the light bulb and changed a lot of things.
A lot.
A lot. I went back and looking on that, I decided to look and see what some of the great inventions were. And I thought maybe the press, Gutenberg press, and the first one that's listed and everywhere I looked was fire. That people, groups many years ago and hundreds of centuries ago, they learned they could cook with fire and they could use it for warmth. And so there were good things they could do with it. Mm-hmm. And when they got ready to, instead of plowing a field or something to replant the next year, they'd set it on fire. And in some areas, they still do that. Right. I know in August, we get a lot of smoke from Central America where they're burning, acres and acres of farmland that's been harvested. But fire was the first one. The second one kind of was the wheel. The wheel was invented 3,500 years before Christ, but it was almost a couple of thousand before they got a chariot, and wagon. I don't know what they did with a wheel without a wagon or without a chariot, but then they got a wagon and it helped them with transportation. You could transport goods a further distance. You gave them a little more freedom. The third thing that I saw that was listed was the nail. And it was only in 1790 that people started mass production of nails. Prior to that, they were made primarily by blacksmiths. And that blacksmith had made, so many nails. But only in 1790 did they have machines that started taking care of the issue in producing nails. And then another one that they had was optical lens, and for microscopes, for all kinds of things, but for people seeing. And in where there was mass production of glasses, the number of people that were dying or getting bitten by snakes went down dramatically. They could see, they're blind. When I was young, I had real eye problems and that couldn't see very well at all. But as they got to see better, they could at least see the snakes that were out there, and I always thought that was kind of funny looking at that. The compass in big ships. Compass allowed people to travel and allowed the captain of a ship to find out, kind of where they were and where they were headed. And the big ships changed everything, and they called them the big ships because they weren't rowboats. But the big ships, Columbus had 3 of them, and considering this day and time, they were small ships. Right. They were boats, but they could get around and they could go places, and they wanted to see new things. And they wanted to discover things, and the result of that was, you had in 13, 14, 15, 1600s, people were trying to discover new areas, a new way to get to the other side of Europe, as they thought it was. Mm-hmm. And it was far east of Asia. And in between, you had the Americas. And so it was difficult. The big ships changed the world. They were one of the ones that really changed the world. And paper currency was another one that came about. And that was first used in China. And that that was in the 9th century, and Europe didn't start using paper currency till about 1600. And that was a big change. but the Chinese were about 700 years ahead of everyone else on paper currency. Also, another big invention was gunpowder.
Oh, yeah.
And that because of weapons and everything. But later, a big change took place because of the atomic bomb. You know, the U.S. dropped 2 of them. And in this day and time, they wouldn't do that.
Right.
But with the nuclear warheads and everything, everyone was afraid to drop one, because if you drop one, the other side is going to drop 2, and if they drop 2, you're going to drop 4, and it wouldn't stop. So it's prevented a lot of wars, and it's produced a lot of peace, even though it was a bad weapon. And Reagan had some negotiations on those weapons, and was able to get the Soviets to slow down some. Chinese now are building more. But, you know, gunpowder was used in your firearms and everything, and that mainly was 1700s that started to develop. The Colt 6-shooter, that was developed because a war was building up for the United States, and the war fell through. And the Texas governor went up to Massachusetts and met with the Colt family, and bought a bunch of 6 guns, and they were trying to chase the Indians out that were raiding the farm homes, and with the 6 gun they could ride fast and catch up with people and shoot at them. Before that, they had rifles or had 1-shot pistols, and that didn't help them much. They might have one gun with 1 shot and 1 pistol with 1 shot. But when you all of a sudden you had 6, you know, it changed things for you, moved it in a different direction. A printing press, that was one that changed things. By 1600, because of what happened in the Gutenberg press, there were over 200 million books had been printed.
Wow. And
I mean, that's unbelievable, that number of books. But people were hungry for knowledge. They wanted to read about other countries. They wanted to read about other things. And printing, it was at a peak at that time. Journalism became very influential and very important starting in the 1700s, because printing, that's how a lot of people got their political news. And they'd get a newspaper or a bulletin or something that they could read. And that continued. If you look in the last century, newspapers had an inordinate amount of influence because of the newspapers, because of the printing press. And they used that to tell the story, but the story was always limited to what that group was seeing or what they thought. They had a bias one way or the other. They always have some type of bias. And newspapers started taking a nosedive in the 1990s. And if you sold a newspaper in the 1980s, you got a lot of money for it. And since then, it's gone down every year because they have fewer readers. And people that print their own newspaper. That's how Trump changed the election in 2016. He was on Twitter all the time, and so he was running his own stories, and the press would have to cover him. And they didn't like him and everything, but they couldn't ignore him. He was ignoring them. And so that's the first election where social media had a big impact. And it's continued to have, and I think will continue to do so in the future, because newspapers have a limited number of people that are going to watch, and that they just have not gotten into the social media as much as, you know, as they needed to keep that influence.
Social media, I'm curious your take, has really took away the power of the press to control the narrative. Now the candidate, in this case, they can get it out there.
They can say whatever they want to.
Yeah.
And and no matter what candidate, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, a liberal, a conservative, the ones that have good social media. Bernie Sanders had pretty good social media, and he was a candidate with very little money against Hillary, and he eventually got beat. Some people question that, but he did not have enough money to run a traditional campaign that they'd had in the past. And he ran a campaign based on what he was utilizing for media, and that was Twitter and other social media accounts.
And whether you agree with his message or not, it was pretty impressive the way he ran that campaign.
It really was. Mm-hmm. Another one of the big inventions, electricity.
Oh, wow.
And the steam engine. Electricity, you look at things that came out, whether it's a refrigerator or television, and of course the internet, and those wouldn't be possible without electricity. Benjamin Franklin was one of the ones that did research in that regard. Thomas Edison, he tried and had hundreds of examples that weren't failures. In his opinion, they just didn't work. And that's, I guess he had to have that opinion and had to have a short memory on the failures. A great basketball player, a great scorer, Michael Jordan, someone like that, they have short memory. Because if they have a long memory, they'll be worried all the time about the last shot they missed. And they want the ball back so they can shoot it and make it this time. And that was Thomas Edison. He was one of those type of individuals that really continued to push as hard as he could. The automobile, big change in everything. And along with that, that caused even a larger change, were interstate highways. Eisenhower came up with interstate highways. And now if you're going to go somewhere, you try to get on an interstate highway, but the traffic is so heavy on interstate highways. I-35 between San Antonio and Dallas is just bumper to bumper. Mm-hmm. And I always thought the plan to have a toll road all the way from Dallas down to Brownsville was a good idea, but people didn't want a toll road. And you don't have to use it, but if you do, that you can be there faster. And the invention of steel and concrete, those were big items, but you don't hear that much about them. In paper really came from China, and also they go back, and one of the great inventions was the plow.
Oh,
and
these are all just people that saw a problem.
Yeah, that solved a problem, and that there was some need. There was a need out there. A lot of people invent something, and there's not a need, and no one cares. Mm-hmm. And then 10 years later, it might be a big idea. But the refrigerator, remote communication, you have a telegraph, and that was big, the Morse code. Mm-hmm. And they hung the telegraph that you could send a Morse code note to someone in San Francisco from New York or vice versa.
Wire,
a wire. And that was a huge change in allowed people to communicate. And then radio came about, and of course telephones. And telephones allowed you to pick up and talk to someone. It was very expensive when we had a long distance call. If we called one of our relatives, boy, you had to talk fast. Had meters running. Get out there and say what you're going to say. Now you get so many hours, and you just call anybody, any place, anytime, and it's pretty easy.
Don't you think it's also interesting that all these inventions were invented years ago, but they didn't stop making them better? They've gotten better. And you talk about the compass. Well, now it's the GPS. They just kept making it better and better.
The GPS, you'd have to stop. You were going into town, you'd stop at the service station and see if they had a local map or if they could give you guidance on where to go. And now, you just put it in the GPS and you go, and it shows on the screen exactly where you need.
Young people never know the excitement of getting lost.
Yeah, the excitement of getting lost and being late to a meeting,
right?
Being real late to a meeting. One other invention that was mentioned at the top, contraceptives.
Oh yeah,
changed families. My parents were both in a family of 12. Wow. My mother was one of 12, and my dad was one of 12. But it changed, and it changed all over America. Changed families from having anywhere from 8 to Tubby Smith. They had 17.
Wow.
He was in the middle. He had 8 older and 8 younger. When he died, when his dad died, Coach Smith, that in Maryland, his dad was so well respected in the state of Maryland, they lowered the flags to half mast. And my sister Linda said, well, they should have done that when she died. She'd been pregnant 17 times, delivered 17 babies. And that I hadn't thought about that, but that was
the birth control pill was the very first pharmaceutical that didn't have an end date on it. You go to the doctor, you get penicillin, 10 days of this. This one you refilled and kept taking forever.
Yeah,
that was the very first one.
The antibiotics, Louis Pasteur, the penicillin, that changed a lot of things that allowed people. People were dying of pneumonia all the time. That was a dread that you catch pneumonia in the fall and winter. It was a deadly disease, and they didn't have anything they could do other than try to sweat you out of it. And once you got antibiotics, boy, it changed everything.
Yeah.
Changed it fast. Other things, the contraceptive changed the family, changed the standard of living for families. And was a big issue. But some of the other things mentioned, the clock, the calendar.
Yeah.
The clock was made in people to have time. You could be on time. No one knew otherwise. You'd have noon, and that'd be about it. But the internet has changed everything because it gives you. Everyone has a library with them in their iPhone. You can ask Sarah any question. I can ask, what's the weather in Oklahoma City? Immediately I know. And you didn't have that before. The thing you had before is that you'd get the newspaper, and there'd be one page on weather, and it'd tell you what the weather was the day before, what the forecast was for the next day in Oklahoma City and Albuquerque and St. Louis, wherever. And so it changed a lot of things. The sailboat was really, it came about as a small boat, but the next thing that happened were the big ships that weren't that big, but they were huge compared to what they had in the past. And it really allowed the North America and South America to be explored fully. I think one of the funny ones that I read, it said erasers. People could erase something they'd put down before, and it had an impact. But I think of all the things that happen, we can think about the ones that have affected us the most. And right now, I'd say it's the internet because of social media and because of communication. You can communicate in an instant with anyone in the world, just no matter what you want to get out. If you want to get some story going in Argentina, there's ways to do that. There's ways they do it. And there's ways that politicians communicate with their voters. And there's now ways that voters know how every politician voted on every issue when it happens.
At their fingertips.
Yeah, they all they've got to do is type in the name and the bill number and everything, and it'll tell you when it was voted on and how everyone voted. And you have instant government. You know real quick which way you're going.
You've got me thinking about, it's about probably in your law practice, you use couriers to send papers. Now that you don't do that anymore.
Just email it to them.
Right.
Yeah. And that's it's easy. The fax machine, at one time, everybody had to have a great fax machine. I don't know that anybody's faxed me anything in years.
No.
It just doesn't happen.
No, it just doesn't.
There's not a need.
Right.
back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, CB radios came in.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody had CB radio and had a handle. That was your name. And you'd be going from Lubbock to La Mesa, and you'd call and southbound on 84. Are there any Smokies between here and La Mesa?
Yeah.
And it cost, I think, about $150 or something. Within a few years, it was like $30.
Yeah.
So it drove the price down. When I was a little kid, when we bought a television, it was expensive. It was a big percent of your earnings. Well, it's not that way anymore.
No.
You know, you can get several TVs and see how they do.
And your TV probably weighed about 500 pounds.
Oh, it's huge. It's
Stick up a
huge.
whole wall.
And it stick up from the wall. Now you can get TVs that are an inch and a half thick, maybe, and just put them on the wall and watch every program that you want to watch. There are more programs. If you start looking at all the available programs, you won't see anything because you won't get through in time to see the program that just ended.
Right.
You know, you have to know kind of what. Other night I was flipping some channels. Now the Storage Wars.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and that's where somebody's abandoned a storage facility, and they go in and they take the lock off and open the door and let you can't go in and look, but you can look from the outside, and then you bid on it. And it's always pretty funny.
Speaking of programs, have you ever watched the one? It's called The Men Who Built America.
Yes.
Isn't that good?
It is.
It's amazing about Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, and it's incredible.
I think of that, and I also think of the Empire State Building was built in 410 days. You couldn't get a permit in 410 days.
Today.
You know, I mean, that's a little over a year. And in this day and time, if you start trying to get a permit, it'd take you 2 or 3 years. But they got it in 410 days from the time they started to the time they were finished.
Crazy.
I mean, that's amazing. You look at Hoover Dam. There's a lot of rumors that, you know, X number of people died. They were pouring concrete, and they fell in the concrete, and they didn't have time to get them out and everything. That's primarily just folklore. You know, they were always trying to rescue anybody. A couple of things that have happened in the news lately. There was a kid on a plane, you know, a small kid, and a lady got on the plane who was overweight, and he called her Miss Piggy, and she just popped him, hit him with her fist, and got him up against the window and started banging his head on the window and everything. They had to pull her off. They arrested her, and he shouldn't have said Miss Piggy, but she shouldn't have tried to beat up a little kid for saying something that he shouldn't have, in a little violence. The bank robbers, I don't know if they put this story out, but it's something that they would put out, that only 1 in 25 has any violence whatsoever, you know, in bank robberies. And 72% of them that are unarmed. They go in and they act like they've got a gun in their pocket and hold up a bank. Yeah. But there was a time, probably 5-10 years ago, had a lot of bank robberies, and that people would go in and say they had a gun in their pocket and they wanted money and got it. And most all of them get caught. And you know, I don't know any that hadn't been caught. They solve them pretty fast,
and they don't get away with that much money.
No,
Like,
you know, they're not very smart.
Chancellor, I saw a story this week that reminded me of one of my favorite stories of yours, and that is that Southwest Airlines has gone away with free bags. They're now charging you to check your bag. And it reminded me of the story about the guy that was being so rude to the ticket agent.
Yeah, that was in Dallas, and the guy was rude and was on the verge of having the police called. Mm-hmm. He was abusive to the ticket agent, and she handled it. And I got up there and I said, "Boy, I'm impressed. That guy was just way out of line." And I said, "How do you handle that and not be upset? You act like everything's fine, and you were nice to him, everything." She said, "Oh, it's pretty easy." Said he's going to Austin. His bags are going to Toronto. Always like that. You don't mess with somebody on the line there. They can do what they want to. There's also a study came out. What are sounds that anger people when they first hear them? And one of the top sounds that angered people the most was the chirping of a smoke detector. Oh. And that happens, and you're looking up at it, and you don't have the ladder, and you can't go to sleep, and it chirps, and it's not like it'll chirp every 15 seconds. About the time you get to sleep, it chirps again.
It's always in the middle of the night, too.
In the middle of the night, and that styrofoam on styrofoam was something that people, that it sets them off, in a microwave that keeps beeping even after it's finished. And this one bothers me. Smacking and loud eaters, or that talk to you while they're eating. I mean, I had a friend that was bad about that, and I got where I wouldn't go to lunch with him.
Is that right?
God Almighty, I just couldn't do it. And spouses, they say the most irritating sound is snoring. Walkways at airports, the revolving, not an escalator, but the moving sidewalks or the moving walkways. They're looking at taking them out in a lot of places because they bypass kiosks and stores where somebody might sell something, and so they want them bypass. I always liked them because you could walk a little faster, and the walkway was moving. Yeah. But they may be on their way out because of that. Saying of the day: necessity is the mother of invention. And we just talked about some of the top inventions. I've got a political pollster going to be coming the next few weeks, and so I think you'll really enjoy that, and we look forward to it.